Welcome back, guys, to another episode of Snowfall News. As always, I got 3 stories for you guys. Today, we're going to be talking about Roblox stocks plummeting. Moving on over to some interesting acquisitions of EA by Saudi Arabia and Jared Kushner. And then lastly, we're going to be ending off with talking about what's going on over at Bethesda and giant rats in front of the studio. All that and more will be covered in today's episode. Why don't we go ahead and get right into it, shall we? So, Roblox stocks are plummeting. In this new age of live service products, where a select few kings sit at the top of the industry, while all the others can only clamor for scraps, one of the lords that sits atop one of the most gilded thrones is that of Roblox, whose crown is gilded with only the finest jewels created from the blood, sweat, and tears of its adolescent audience. But it seems, however, that there might be cracks forming in its perfect and shining visage, as it recently announced its earnings for the past year, and the data showed a rather stark downturn. From its July report, it has shown that growth had slowed after massive efforts to expand the brand. This investment, combined with the lack of hits and popular experiences within the game, has led the company to lose about $70 billion, or 70% of its share value from last year. Roblox as a game positioned itself within the industry as being a playground for user-generated content, with a rather robust suite of tools and an ecosystem designed around rewarding players to create their own games within the game itself. They create not only original experiences, but ones that manage to emulate or even improve upon existing games in the larger industry. Of course, the vast majority of this is done by young developers, mostly minors, amongst the best of whom have a chance at earning real-world currency. The entire system itself has come under a lot of scrutiny, not just for how it takes advantage of its user base, but also for the rather relaxed moderation it has in pursuing adults who might seek to take advantage of the larger population of children who play the game. The company directly blames the downturn on a lack of viral, popular experiences that drive engagement, and from that, spending. Instead, a lot of players are flocking to experiences with less of an innate incentive to spend money on the game. They also say that changes to the way games are promoted on the site contributed to this, as they instead focused on long-term growth and engagement rather than short-term profits, and that players instead flocked to evergreen games that they could play over and over again. They had refused to disclose a more comprehensive full-year guideline on how they might be moving forward, but it is highly possible that the changes in their game recommendations and the move towards keeping players on the platform longer do suggest that the company is attempting to solidify a more retentive, loyal player base than the one that simply comes back when a hot new experience is trending. I, however, have never tried to hide my rather blatant animosity towards Roblox as a company and as a game. Not only have their actions in the past been nothing but rather shady, lacking in trying to secure the safety of their incredibly young player base, but in some instances they almost seem to use them, both as sort of a attraction to the site and also as the engine that keeps the machine turning. Any downturn is good news to me, even if, in the end, this large loss wouldn't be nearly enough to make it go under. But at the end of the day, you aren't seeing any sympathy from me from the devil. Speaking of the devil, next up, Saudi Arabia acquires EA. Very few things in the gaming world tend to make sense to me, especially when it comes to the business side of things, but this really might be a first. It was finalized just last week that EA would be fully transferring to a privately owned company, being completely delisted from the NASDAQ and sold to a group of buyers, some of which include the Saudi Arabia Public Investment Fund and Jared Kushner, for a whopping total of $55 billion. This, of course, is part of Saudi Arabia's larger investment strategy as they try to move away from an economy centered around oil into more sustainable forms of investment. Already, they had been making moves in the esports and FGC parts of the gaming community, but it seems they've gained the confidence to take it a step further. As stated, however, it's not just them among the people who are on the deal to turn one of gaming's largest AAA studios privately owned. Also a part of this is Jared Kushner, better known as President Donald Trump's brother-in-law. However, This acquisition was not done entirely out of pocket, as in order to complete the transaction, the group had to take out a substantial loan of $22 billion, making it the de facto largest leveraged acquisition in gaming history, a debt that will subsequently be put onto EA to pay back and prove its worth. In such circumstances, it's rather unlikely that there won't be some form of mass layoffs or cost-cutting measures in order to have that kind of money be paid back over the course of this acquisition, making the fate of many developers within the company rather hazy. Still, it's not hard to see why Saudi Arabia was so interested in the gaming esports giant, as amongst all of the studios out there, now they have perhaps the most solid lineup of live service games that keeps gamers continually emptying their wallets year after year. If your goal was to find some evergreen source of long-term investment, this is probably one of the best and safest you're going to get. This is part of the reason why many in the industry, including Bloomberg reporter Jason Schreier, are more than likely predicting that EA will be doubling down on these franchise live service titles rather than branching out. Naturally, the bigger concern for consumers and people like myself is the censorship issues and aggressive stance Saudi Arabia takes towards LGBTQ representation in their games. The country has a reputation for not exactly playing nice with people outside the bounds of Sharia law, and even when they don't take direct action, it no doubt leaves a rather bad taste in the mouth to support them in the first place. A reputation they've tried to cover up equally with sports washing, which this deal is no doubt a part of as well. In the larger scheme of things, typically a company being privately owned is actually a good thing. Some of the companies with the best PR out there, like Valve or Larian Studios, are able to meet consumer standards so well in part because they aren't beholden to a large base of investors that have to be appeased, and it gives them the freedom to act as they please. But of course, this situation is far more like a ball and chain, and I'm especially concerned for the groups who will be affected by this the most, in an industry that already has been rather cutthroat to the people who work in it. Not to mention the fans of games like The Sims, which already has a community rather deeply seated in marginalized communities. Whatever happens, though, this will more than likely not be the end of Saudi Arabia's ever-encroaching march on the gaming industry. And for a final story, The Elder Scrolls 6, Scabby the Ratican. For whatever reason, gaming companies just seem to love to announce games when they're nowhere near the end of development. I suppose it's more a result of these gaming development cycles getting as long as they are these days, but it's almost a little ridiculous at a certain point. The worst offender of these has to be Elder Scrolls 6, which had gotten a release trailer 8 years ago, with still no release date in sight. A game that right now is getting a whole bunch of attention, but just like back then, it's serving more of a distraction than really announcing anything. Asha Sharma, the recently installed CEO of Xbox Studios, had taken a trip over to Bethesda Studios alongside a number of other leaders at the company to check in on the state of their flagship studio. Apparently, they had gotten a sneak preview of the progress of their next big hit. But not all is quite right in Tamriel. This visit notably ignored the rather large elephant in the room. Or I suppose in this case, rat. A giant inflatable rat at that. Asha Sharma's visit comes after a recent round of layoffs, with over 1,600 employees at the studio being laid off, and coincides with the CWA union protests just outside the office. Members of the union came out wearing red shirts, putting up red flags on the lawn for each and every employee laid off, and they certainly weren't doing it alone, as they also put out an inflatable, which they lovingly called Scabby, to keep them company. Bethesda and Xbox have been claiming the layoffs themselves won't be affecting development of the title, but it's a little hard to believe them, especially considering how long the game has been out. Regardless, Sharma dropping news about the game is no doubt trying to skirt around the issue of layoffs and restructuring the company, of which pretty much nobody is buying. After all, her tweets don't tell much besides, I suppose, the title of the game, which was hidden by exactly 8 asterisks following The Elder Scrolls 6. Perhaps some lore fans can parse out what the title and location for the next game is going to be, but it's not going to take a detective exactly to know what Xbox really meant by those tweets. And with that, that'll be it for this week's episode of Snowfall News. Some more interesting things been happening in the industry. To be honest, I'm a little concerned about, especially the Saudi Arabia bit. I'm coming a bit further on and off script. I had mentioned a bit before, but in the FTC, there's been a lot of encroaching on that, especially with S&K being owned by Saudi Arabia. They've been slowly getting more and more of the space, even encroaching Evo as well. So I'm a little concerned to see them making more moves outside of that too. And of course, my heart goes out to all the union workers who are protesting of Bethesda. There's been a lot of movement in the unions since COVID, so I'm glad to see they're moving more. But anyway, that'll be it for this week, guys, and I'll catch you guys next week. Have a good one.